So, Dr. Adrienne Leslie-Toogood, thank you for joining me today to have this conversation, this COVID-19 conversation.
Well, thanks for having me. I appreciate it. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, me too. So let me just connect. We were chatting a minute ago, but just for everybody that's watching this so they understand the connection, coincidentally or not coincidentally, you showed up on a Coaches for Coaches call that I was a part of. And you did this, what I thought was a phenomenal presentation. You had this metaphor with the Wizard of Oz and athletes, and I thought that was really relevant. So we'll talk a little bit about that today. But the reason why I wanted to have you on, and the reason why I'm doing this mini series, is when the world got was shut down all at the same time. We all paused because of COVID-19. I was really curious on how different groups were going to respond or adapt to the change, right? All external change that we had no control over. And one of the groups that went through my mind were the Olympic athletes, especially from Canada, all, work at blood, sweat, and tears, expecting, planning, preparing, training for, their sport and their moment. And then all of a sudden, it's no longer an option. Matter of fact, Canada was the first country to, put up their hand and take a stand and say, we're not going to put our athletes at risk or anyone else, and we're not going to attend. And there were a lot of athletes that were all the athletes that you work with that were a part of that team. And I was really curious on, so we can start there. From an Olympian standpoint, from someone who's put in that effort and trained, and then there's an external situation like that they have no control over, how do you navigate that in a healthy way? And what's that process look like? Is there a grieving process? Is there a, how do they navigate that, and what's that look like?
Yeah, I think that obviously, the words like unprecedented and historic, and even now when people talk about it, the language sometimes you hear is the Great Pause. We've had the Great Depression, we've had the Great War, and now we've had the Great Pause. So it's certainly not just athletes adapting to the situation. But I think how you do it is that you start by being very self-aware and honest with yourself about where you are and what you're dealing with. And then you go on, you mentioned the whole idea of grief. And indeed, there's an interesting graph that the Red Cross developed that looked at people that deal with really life-changing situations. And there definitely seems to be an adaptation that goes through the different all where they end up in a lot of training of mind. And you have athletes who have been away for 5 months training and winning test events, and then there's no Olympics. And one of those athletes is Tyler Mislichuk. And when you hear Tyler talk, he came to the conclusion that, it's an investment. All that work I've put in, he was someone who lived in Spain, invested his blood, sweat, and tears. If you're doing triathlon, you're not just going through the motions. You have a lot of painful workouts that get you ready so that you can have a season. And 2 weeks before a season, so he found that it was his mind recognized, I may not be fruits of my labors this season, but I will in the future. It's an investment. And other athletes are able to, work through it, but everyone reacts in their own way, and everyone has to kind of adjust and adapt because it's the reality. And we often in sport use so many metaphors. We talk about the fact that, there's some things that you can control, and there's other things that you can't control. And it's really the great example of focusing on the parts that you can control. I was on a phone call just the other day, and it was led by Carrie McNeil, who's the lead mental performance person with the Canadian Olympic Committee. And she used a model of hardiness. And she said, we need to work on our hardiness plan, because hardiness buffers us and gives us resilience to stress. And there's different components of that. There's focusing on what you can control. That's one of the C's. There's connecting with people, but connecting with the right people. And she used the analogy of a board of directors, and you have a lot of different people in your life, and you need different things at different times, knowing who those people are and connecting with them when you can. And there's also understanding kind of what your purpose and your why is, and making sure that you live a value-based life, and you continue to kind of come back to that. And So I guess for a lot of athletes, it's a time of reflection like anyone else. It's a time of reconnecting with their sport, and they're impacted differentially, just like everyone in society is. There's some athletes where an extra year, they're quite young, they can develop their technique, and not a bad thing. That will actually help me. There's opportunity here. And there's other athletes that might be ready to move on to university or retire, or we're peaking, and they may not be as ready next year. And so for those athletes, it might be a very different experience. Just as right now, there's some businesses that might be thriving and doing very well, and there's others that would be very negatively impacted, and they're still looking for what those opportunities are. But the immediate impact is very difficult and very painful. And so I think, I could literally, one question, I could probably fill all your time with that. So maybe I'll stop and I'll see what resonates for you, and then we can go from there.
I'll just have to schedule you for the next 4 weeks, and then we'll hit 4 questions.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know what's happening. So, but yeah, so I think that you're exactly right. It's unprecedented. And one of the nice things is that in the last while, there's been so many people giving of their time and resource. So there's so many unbelievable professionals and tools that you have access to. And one of those individuals is Chris Hadfield, who's the astronaut. And he was unbelievable, just such a lived experience. And he spoke about the fact that, we used to have a reality we existed in, and it's not the same anymore. And the more we're in love with how it used to be, the less we're going to be able to adapt and adjust to what is. And I've heard people talk about the new normal. And one of my colleagues I spoke with, Christina Fink, she said, I don't know if it's a new normal. It's more like a before and after. Things are different now. And we need to, again, almost use the serenity prayer of, accepting some things and, changing some things and having the wisdom to understand the difference. And I think that's a great analogy for it. And that's where you had used, you mentioned the Wizard of Oz. And it's interesting. I actually worked at Kansas State University for a number of years. Both my kids were born down there. And I was doing that Coaches for Coaches presentation. And I don't know, I just woke up in the morning and I was just thinking about the fact that, I don't think we're in Kansas anymore. I was just thinking about that story. And in a way, the more I've thought about it, I think it's a great metaphor for right now. That was someone whose world was turned upside down. A tornado came and tore everything apart. It was very different. Her reality was very different. And I think we're all in that place right now. And what's really cool about that story is it sparked kind of this journey. And, there's some things, they didn't journey alone. They found each other and journeyed together. And I think that although we're physically distanced, I think a lot of people are learning to journey together through this and maybe being more vulnerable than they have in the past. There used to be a work and a life divide, and we never spoke about it. But now there's a blend, and so now we're being invited into people's homes. We're aware that there's young kids in the other room that, need to be there, and we're having those conversations in a very different way. So that's one piece that's really interesting. And the other is that they were searching for these intangible things that sometimes maybe we don't add value because they're not physically present, but they were searching for heart and courage and mind and all these really important assets and attributes that perhaps way back in the day we used to value more. And so maybe as a world, we're in these places where we're able to kind of discover these parts of ourselves that are really unbelievably important for whatever journey we're on, but we don't always allocate the time for it. But certainly it's slowed down and we're on that journey. And, they ended up figuring it out and finding it and realizing that what they were looking for was really skills that they possessed. And it was things that they could do and create. So anyways, I just sort of ran with it. There were so many great quotes from Wizard of Oz. I had no idea.
I never looked at it that way before. I won't look at it.
Yeah.
I try to explain to my kids, it's not just about the Tin Man, but they're 10 and 7. So they just want to watch the show.
They're not ready yet, Darrell. They're not ready. Trust me, I've seen it before too, and I never saw it that way either. So I use a lot of stories and metaphors that are pretty random. So sometimes it takes a while for me to bring it back. So if you're sitting there going, where is she going with this? Hopefully at the end it will connect.
So you know what? People will be able to watch this again, and if they don't get it for a couple years, it'll click on. Hey, before we move on from there, Dr. Adrienne, there was that one metaphor of the ruby slippers, though. You talked about it just a minute ago, but you started with that and it was really powerful. Can you talk about that?
Sure. There was a beautiful line in it where You've always had the power, my dear. You just had to figure it out for yourself. And again, quite honestly, until I read these quotes, I don't think I even got it. But, I just thought maybe there was this wonderful witch. And, but, she was looking for these magical slippers to get her where she needed to be. But ultimately, she learned that it was her, and she possessed those skills all along. And she just had to believe, and she just had to learn that. And I think a lot of times in our lives, well, I'm a big believer actually in kind of, the whole journey. And I'm very passionate about sport. I work in it, and sport is this kind of this journey that helps us figure out who we are and where we fit in the world and what our skills and what our potential is in a very tangible way. But I really think that that's a metaphor for living our lives as well. And we started off with ruby slippers, and another children's story that I love is the Velveteen Rabbit. And when I was growing up, it was a story my mom would read to me every night. And quite honestly, she never usually made it through because she's a little bit emotional, and I'd be like, oh goodness. But that story is about stuffed animals becoming real, and what happened was there was a little boy in the story, and he had scarlet fever. And he was very sick, and so he loved this Velveteen Rabbit and hugged it and hugged it and hugged it. And the idea is that as a stuffed animal, it's like an inanimate object, but when it experiences the love of a child, it becomes real. And so at the end, this stuffed animal, the Velveteen Rabbit, was talking to another, stuffy, of course, sort of like Toy Story today, yeah. And he was talking to this other, animal, and just saying, well, what is real? And I think it was a tin horse, and he was saying to him that, real is something that happens gradually to you. And he's like, oh, does it hurt? And it's like, yeah, it does hurt sometimes, but you know what? It doesn't you can't become if you're fragile, or you break really easily. And by the time you do become real, you actually don't look the same, and the analogy there is, you might lose one of your eyes and your ears, and,
right.
You get pretty beat up along the way, but it's beautiful. And once you become real, you can't become unreal again, and so it's this story of becoming. And Brene Brown's another person who talks a lot about having the courage to be vulnerable, and how now in our world, there's so many people that can comment on how you're doing so easily. And there's so many people that then don't have the courage to kind of be that man in the arena and live, dare greatly. And so I love this idea of becoming. And that's a big thing in my world. There's no right or wrong. There's no such thing as failure. There's only learning and growth and becoming better and reaching your potential. And that's a mindset I really have. And any performer I work with, whether it's someone who's an air traffic controller, or if it's an RCMP emergency response guy, or if it's an athlete, I just want them to have their head high at the end, because they've done the best they could on the journey they've had. And so right now there's been all this stuff tossed our way, and we're maybe on a very different path, and we don't know where the heck we are. And you know what? It's all going to help us grow and become, and whatever our human potential is. And I'm not sure we ever arrive. I think it's ongoing. Mm-hmm. And I firmly believe that. And so again, the Wizard of Oz is a very tangible example of that. Velveteen Rabbit's a story of that. And I think there's maybe a lot of truth in those stories. And all of us now are having that privilege that we may not have chosen this journey, but goodness, we're on it. And what does that mean? We're not sure, but let's accept the reality that we have, and let's look for the opportunities, and let's continue to challenge ourselves to grow in very difficult times.
I think the philosophy is great and healthy. From a practical standpoint, how do you recommend someone reconciles the fact that that reality, maybe it was a business, maybe it was not being able to see their parents that passed away, right? That were in the city, like those hard realities that aren't necessarily as flexible, that are very finite. Mm-hmm. How can someone reconcile that so that they can heal and move on, or at least be able to process it so that they can journey on and continue to grow, like you said? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that's very true. And I guess for me, I'd say it in a few ways. I'd say sometimes it's a longer journey. And I loved what you said when you said feel and move on. And that's unbelievably important. You have to feel it. You have to help it become part of your experience. And there's so many. Susan David is someone who talks about this concept of emotional agility. And she has a wonderful podcast where she's interviewed. She has a TED Talk and a book, she's done very well, but there's wonderful things. And I guess I'll use, again, a random story to illustrate it. I have a lecture series once a year where I bring someone into town, and I'm always kind of like, oh my gosh, I can't believe that person came. That's so amazing. They're incredible human beings. And one of my speakers was Kurt Tribble, and he's a cardiothoracic surgeon. So he's a heart guy, you don't want to see Kurt. Things aren't going well with Kurt, yeah. Especially he's very well respected, so only like you're. So he's a heart surgeon, and someone after his presentation asked him a question, and they said, "What do you do when you lose a patient?" Because for him, that's his job, and he said that. He said, "Well, that's my job, and I had to figure out a way to deal with that and work through that, or I couldn't keep being a heart surgeon." And he said, "For me, it's remember and forgive. And so if I lose a patient, I spend time reflecting on that operation so that I can honor their life by becoming a better doctor. And then I forgive myself." And he goes, the latter was pretty hard to learn how to do. And at first it's kind of counterintuitive and you're like, what? He just lost someone. You really want to feel good about himself? But the reality is, if he has an operation in the morning and he's operating on someone you love at 1:00, do you want a doctor that feels horrible about themselves, or a doctor that's remembered and forgiven and he's ready to battle again? And so I think that we have to feel, we have to grieve, we have to be very honest with ourselves, and we have to allow ourselves to feel the pain of that and allow it to kind of shape us. Things happen to us, and it does change us. It changes how we react to the world, how we respond to situations. It's just a matter of how it changes us and how we choose to allow it to change us. But as soon as we stop, being willing to feel, and we stay in that moment, then it's much more challenging to have that emotional agility and to respond to the life that's before us. So my thing is, I want everyone to be willing to have the courage to kind of live deeply and live fully and live their best life, whatever that means for them. And so when these things happen, I think that we have to have processes in place so that we can remember and forgive and accept the parts that we have control over and let the parts that we don't. And I've seen it in so many different ways. I talk in a number of different situations, and I have, one group, and we were chatting, and this was more a corporate setting. And one of the women on the calls was talking about how she really worries for her grandchildren, and we want life to be better for those that come after us, and we don't want them to experience this stuff, and especially if we've had turbulent times. And so it's tough where we just don't experience that. And then in a very abstract way, again, it's recognizing that there are other professionals, because she was very worried about their schooling, and there's other professionals meeting regularly taking care of that, and we have to allow them to do that part. We can't take that on too. That's not our burden. Just like with my athletes, if you have a bunch of athletes that are wondering when they're going to be able to golf in a PGA Tour event, there's people meeting every 24 hours about that. You have to trust them with that. That's right. Theirs to figure out. Your part is to keep yourself mentally and physically well, so that when that decision's made, you're able to respond in a way that honors kind of who you want to be in that moment. So there's lots of ways, that you can talk about it. And I often talk to people too about the idea of who they want to be in different situations. And when I was on that call, I heard it explained in the way of like a brand. So if you think of a corporate brand, and they're like, what do you want your brand to be? And how does your brand respond to those situations, and how does your brand adapt? And what do you want people to say about you when you're not around? Because that's what that's what you think about when you think about brand. So I love that idea, that concept of a personal brand. So again, I don't even know what your question was. I don't know if I answered it, but
yeah. So the question was about reconciling the finiteness of an event. And you went on to talk about your friend that had come in and speak, the heart surgeon.
Yes.
I think that's really interesting because it's kind of counterintuitive, right?
It is.
To A-type personalities that just I want to grind through that pain, right? And I want to control that and hold that, and then I'm gonna go validate that I'm still good by doing the thing, but it never goes away because you're still holding on. You haven't taken to what you were saying is that time to forgive and to honor the situation and forgive yourself. It's really counterintuitive, and it seems like that there's a clue there on how to move on.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think it is very counterintuitive. And there was an author in the US, her name's Maya Angelou. She was an African-American poet. She has passed away, but she read at President Clinton's inauguration, which is quite a big deal. Interesting, we're having this conversation in the context of what's happening in the US, like right. Today probably, and all week. But she wrote her autobiography, and she was a very impoverished African-American woman in the United States. And so she has quite a story. And the reporters in conversation with her were asking her if she wish some of those things did not happen to her, because it looks quite traumatic from an outsider's perspective. And she took a breath and she said, I don't will any of those experiences away, because every experience I've had creates the wise woman who sits before you today. And even when you think of this COVID and other things, I think a lot of times we do, like, we want it to be over. We want to get, and it's like, wait, why will away parts of your life? Have the courage to be like Maya Angelou, where she learned and grew and became wise from that. And, we don't choose our path. We don't know why. And we don't understand a lot of times. And some things are very, very difficult. And I saw actually a social media picture where there was, it was a medical facility, and it looked like perhaps it was definitely medical professionals. It could have been nurses or doctors, but there was, it was the window of a hospital, and one of them had sort of a heart shape in their hands, and another one of them held up a sign that said, they're at peace. And this was obviously the situation you described, which was a family that was not there to care for that person. And unbelievably powerful that these medical professionals were caring for this human in front of them, but also the family that was outside. Such a beautiful moment, and I'm not sure. I don't think I can make that better for someone. And again, I'll go back to Brene Brown, and she talks about the idea of empathy. And empathy is not rushing to turn the lights on for someone, but it's having the courage to sit in the darkness with them. Right. And that to me is very powerful. And I know in my work, there's definitely been times along this journey where I've been like, oh my gosh, I can't make this good anymore. And I was like, oh no. And I read that quote, and it meant so much to me. And I was like, that's right. I have to listen to them and sit with them in it, because I can't make it better. It's not going to be better, but maybe we can discover together where we're going to head, but we're not going to make this better. There's not a better. And that's a situation that's not a better. And there's probably a lot to grieve. And I think in those moments too, what people are realizing is they're not just grieving the inability to contact. And we'll take it from there even to a sports situation where you have NCAA athletes who their career is over now and they don't get to go to that last national championships, or, maybe they're not going to get back to the Olympic Games. And there's a lot of lost moments, right? Where people now are like, gosh, I don't want to take anything for granted anymore. I want to really live fully, and I want to experience them fully, because I don't know. I don't know if I'm going to be able to play in that game again. I don't know if I'm going to see my mom again. I don't know. I think that for us as humans, it's that part's really resonated for us as well. And that's been one of the things that we've learned through this time potentially.
I agree. I've got another question, because I feel like we could keep stay on one thing, but on that train of thought about who we become through the crisis, and as we move into recovery, there's something that I saw. I think it was on your website, and I think it was an athlete who's talking about their pro self, and somehow I don't know if I came up with this or if it was on the website, but I think you talked about writing a letter to your pre-COVID self. I think it's a brilliant, practical, tactical thing. We can all do that. So please.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, you did read that. Mm-hmm. Again, I like to just be very random. And so it came from a few places, but the Players Tribune is a great place for stories, and it came from athletes who wanted to have an opportunity to tell their story rather than their story be interpreted and published. So it's got all these wonderful stories, and one section is letters to your younger self. And so there's individuals who will kind of write reflections of things they wish they knew back then. And then obviously, kids. So that might be more fun for your 7 and 9. They might listen to Ronaldo more than us. I don't know. I'm pretty cool, but whatever. And, and there really is amazing people that write in the space. And so, you can really, there's lots that you can learn from those lived experiences. So it came from that place. And then this idea, I heard people talking about, there's lots that I'm learning now, but does it stick, and once I'm done in this space, will I remember that I thought this stuff? And I was like, oh, so it's something that I've encouraged some of my folks to do, is to write a letter to your pre-COVID self, and kind of like write things that you've learned right now that you want to remember and retain. And then even we've taken it in a lot of different directions. But yesterday someone read me their letter and it was very powerful. Like, it was very emotional, some of the things. And this was an individual who, sometimes we go in a really rapid pace in life and we're quite broken, but it's the individual you discussed. You just keep on going, you power through, and their health was starting to be really impacted. And but they still kept going because they are type A, they are good, but it was an unbelievable gift to have this time where they had to unpack some things, and they had to admit how unwell they were and become healthy again. And so that's what they want to remember going forward, is that health is the priority, and that's necessary for performance. And it was just a really powerful journey that they went on. But we're all learning something right now that we want to remember. And so I would say, write a letter to your pre-COVID self, but then also take a second to think about, okay, so what's one or two ways that I can live that moving forward? Or what's one or two changes or adjustments that I can live kind of moving forward? And it's because that's the only time it will stick. Otherwise it'll just be a cool letter that goes in a drawer that, you might look at every once in a while and go, oh, that's a cool letter. And wow. And that's even one way to keep it alive. I had another athlete who wrote, I promise myself every day. And when it's easy to get disconnected from what your values are, especially when you're striving. And this was an athlete that was training for Olympic trials. And
is this the champion's letter? Yeah, I was going to ask.
Yeah. Well, there you go. I'm anticipating, Darrell. We're just bonded,
Oh.
Yeah, totally. But yeah, and it came from this idea of a champion's letter, and someone had read a book, and a champion's letter is kind of like, once you consider yourself successful, what will that be like? Like, write about it. Write about what it will feel like, look like. Okay, cool. Now look at that letter and start living that way today, because if you live that way, you give yourself a better chance of accomplishing that anyways. Don't wait till you're, a champion to carry your head high and feel good about yourself. Feel good about yourself right now. And so I had spoken with this one athlete about that, and she said, oh, well, can I write I promise myself every day? And it was Kelsey Wog. And then she wrote this letter, and it was unbelievably powerful. And it was kind of how she wanted to live her year. And then when this whole situation happened, we were able to recognize that she had lived very authentically that whole year, and she had no regrets about anything. And there's a lot of athletes and a lot of people that probably can't stay in that space. But what we did was, once she wrote it, we read it once a week, and we talked about it. We talked about how we did last week and what that means for this week. And it was a really helpful tool for us. So if you do write your pre-COVID letter to your pre-COVID self, I'd recommend revisiting it. Plan to, read it every once in a while and revisit it and see how you're doing and how you're remembering those things. Because I think that lots of insight can come from there.
Repetition helps keep it stick. Helps it to stick. When you're writing your champion's letter, I want to break this down a little bit, because what I thought was interesting about when you showed us the different points, what I thought was brilliant about her letter was that it wasn't just the external victories that she was declaring or that she was claiming. There were a lot of internal, how she was choosing, or how she was going to go about overcoming, how she was going to go about processing setbacks or failures. And I don't have the specifics in front of me, but I thought that was brilliant to have the two pieces. There was always internal and external, versus, again, I'm going to be there, I'm going to be on top of the mountain. But there's a whole journey to get there, and what do our responses look like on the way to that journey?
Yeah, absolutely. You're entirely right. I think you remembered a lot of it, and it was very much internal, and it was very much about how she wanted to do it. And I talk a lot, and again, these are basic things, outcome versus process. And if you want to get to the top of the mountain, you give yourself the best chance of getting there if we focus on the process of what we want to do and things that are in our control along the way. And she had a lived experience in terms of what works for her and what's important for her. And there was definitely a lot in there around unpacking failure and giving herself permission to fail, because if you really want to push your limits, you are going to fail a lot along the way, and that's going to hurt and be hard. And as a result, we're humans, and our brain is meant to try and protect ourselves and keep us safe. So we end up living in that way, and we have to kind of, someone I heard talk about it, I think it was Eddie O'Connor, I can't remember, it might have been, but he talked about resisting the biological urge to, like, you know, pull away and protect ourselves. We have to learn to lean into the discomfort and the pain if we want to live fully and we want to reach whatever our potential is. And so she recognized that and wanted to use this as a tool to help her do that. The other thing she did from a gratitude kind of gratefulness perspective and really living that is she had a locked Instagram account that only she could access, and only a couple of people were on there. And every day she'd post a picture of something she wanted to remember about that journey, so that the journey became more than just that day or that moment or that one swim, because a whole lifetime went into it. And just recently we actually, Rhiannon Lear came to talk to some of my athletes, and she's a 2-time Olympian who, you know, has been retired for a long time. And she spoke about an experience she had, her second Olympic Games. She underperformed. She was expected to do quite well. A lot of pressure. She internalized she did not swim well. And she felt a lot of shame because of that. Mm-hmm. And she spoke to us, and this is like 20 years post-retirement, but she talked about how there was some sort of assignment, which was, you know, who's your Canadian hero? And a young girl had emailed her or contacted her and said that she chose her. And even as she talked about it now, like on Tuesday, which was 20 years after retirement, she was emotional as she talked about it. And she said it allowed her to take pride in her journey. And it allowed her to value what she brought, even though she didn't get the result she wanted. And how many of us hold on to these things and hold on to these moments or these relationships or these, you know, these interactions or these business experiences where we didn't perform the way we wanted, and we hold it in because we're plowing through. And to have the courage to be honest and honor the feelings so that we can learn and grow and stand on the foundation instead of having that skeleton in the closet is so important and so powerful. And so I'm a big believer in having tools and practices in place so that we can keep people well, so they can continue to, you know, be as amazing as they were born to be.
So is there science that shows, you know, if you've got two people and let's just, you know, all things being equal in talents and abilities, and we're going to make it as controlled as possible. But you got two people that, and one of them is, you know, just a grinder, right? Just let's not recognize the feeling about it. Let's just do the thing, right? Let's just check the box, because if we check enough boxes, if we save enough pennies, we're going to have $1. If we save $1, we're going to have, right? And we're going to get to where we want to go. What does that put, you know, if you can speak in hypotheticals, look like versus the other person B, who is honoring that journey along the way, you know, maybe taking the time to feel the pain, but being able to reconcile it and move on. And maybe there's journeys longer, maybe it's not, I don't know, I'm totally just making this up. But what did those two individuals look like potentially at the end?
Well, I'll answer it. You know, there's so many different ways, and that's what great questions are, right? There's so many different ways to answer it, and so I really appreciate the openness that you're providing. And I think I'll answer it from the perspective of self-compassion theory, which is a researcher named Kristen Neff. It's Neff. She has a great website called selfcompassion.org, and it has tons of great resources on there. And self-compassion is this idea of treating yourself the way you would treat someone else that you cared about, and really being kind to yourself and recognizing a common humanity in the pain that you're experiencing. And it's people who work through things and, you know, feel, etc. And there is a lot of research that looks at all different ways. And one small example is a master's student that I worked with, Laura Cicerelli at the university, and she looked at failure experience, and she had people think of past failure experience while they were attached to biofeedback equipment. And she also looked at their self-compassion rating. And there was definitely a correlation between some parameters such as heart rate variability. And heart rate variability is an underlying physiological parameter that we don't really, it's not as intuitive for us, but it's a really, really profound one. And I know for myself, when a woman's in labor and delivery and they have a monitor on the fetus, what they're looking at is they're looking at the heart rate variability of the fetus. And as soon as the variability becomes compromised, that's when they know the fetus is in distress, and that's when they will induce or force you to have your baby now, like as soon as like my second child was 2 weeks overdue, and at the 1 week interval you go in and you do the monitor. Had he been had limited range of heart rate variability, then I would have been induced, but it was like, okay, you can stay another week because it looks like he's still thriving and doing okay. When people have a heart attack now, the parameter that they're really trying to train in is this heart rate variability parameter. Physiologists now are looking at heart rate variability as indicators of under recovery, and so there's just a wide range of things. And in her study, it looked like people who weren't as self-compassionate, who were harder on themselves, who hung on to those failure experiences, their heart rate variability was more restricted. That has huge health implications. If you are, because again, heart rate variability means it's basically the interbeat interval of your heart. And so we think of as a heart like a metronome, but a heart that's like a metronome is a very unhealthy heart. There's actually a lot of variability in your heart rate. It's like beep, 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 like it bounces all over the place when you're healthy, when you're well, when you're relaxed, when you're calm. And when it's restricted, that means we're under stress. And so if you have someone who has these failure experiences that they're holding on to, and they have a reduced heart rate variability, that's just not good from a long-term health perspective. We also know that people who are self-compassionate, they're more likely to stay committed to their goals long-term, which makes sense. They're not killing themselves and wearing themselves down. It's exhausting to treat yourself badly. We know that they rebound from failure more quickly. Like if you just look at that one little piece of literature, there's lots of really interesting findings because, again, it's counterintuitive as well. Be kind to myself. I'm driven, and that's cool. You're driven, but now you have to learn to be kind to yourself. You have to learn to balance that. Too much of any one thing is not helpful. So she has lots of great resources. She has reflections on there, meditations on there, imagery scripts on there, lots of great resource. And she does a lot of great research, as well as a lot of other people in that area now as well.
So we're almost at the hour. It's gone like that.
I know.
I have a question for you. You're so present and you're so thoughtful in your response, and I really appreciate your generosity of time. What do you want to be remembered by, or how do you want to be remembered when it's all said and done? Down the road.
Yeah.
How does Dr. Adrienne Leslie-Toogood want to be remembered?
Yeah, that's a great question. What's interesting is it's a really small world, and I don't keep in touch with people. I'm always like moving quickly, and I was doing a consult, and a psychologist in town had contacted me and noticed on her voicemail there was an individual on there that I used to work with named Rob Santos, like when I was in grad school. So I know I look young, but it's like, a long time ago. And he sent me this picture when we were in grad school. He was an incredible artist, and he had drawn this picture, and he wrote this like little poem, and it was in 1997, I think, that this was written. So it's 23 years ago. And I read it and I was like, oh my gosh, that's unbelievable. And so I would love to be remembered by what he wrote about me 23 years ago when I didn't have that insight. And I think it's someone who had the courage to live fully and, care deeply for other people, and always put other people and their needs first, and just wanted to make the people and the world a better place, and was always kind and patient, and I guess ultimately use the gifts that I have for the better of other people, the betterment of other people. And that would be pretty cool. So I like to, I love transformative leadership. I love to find what other people have to offer and put them in positions where they can help, make that better. And I love to make people the hero in their own stories. I love to find their strengths and help them feel good about themselves, and help them find the courage maybe that they didn't know that they had.
You're in the perfect, that's beautiful. I appreciate you sharing. And I think anybody that logs on to and views this is going to be better for hearing your wisdom and your insights. So you can help people if they want to reach out to you. How does someone reach out to you, whether, in sport, business, corporate, to be able to work with you? And if you
Yeah, absolutely. It's very easy. My last name is memorable. It's Toogood, Toogood. Just drtoogood.com, drtoogood.com is my website. And if you go there, I'm not the best at that sort of thing, so it's not really fancy or anything, but at least you can find me. And on there, my email address is on there, which is just adrienne@drtoogood.com. Or, you can do the contact me thing. And yeah, you can find me anytime. And I really just love to listen and look at what's working and support people. And so they can create environments for themselves and other people that others can thrive in, I think a lot of times we get scared of some of the other stuff, like the mental health and the safe workplaces, and it doesn't have to be that scary. We just have to create room for conversation, and we have to learn how to create environments where we can find out what's really happening inside of people. Mm-hmm. A lot of times people are pretty good at hiding that stuff, and that's unfortunate. We want, I guess, create an environment where people are comfortable bringing their whole selves. That's one of the things I really like to strive for.
Love it. Well, I've still got a list of questions, but so we'll have to connect another time. If you'd come back, I think it would be great. I'd love it, and really appreciate again generosity of your time. Thanks for being with me.